Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, Prisoners of Peace, Chapter 1. Isn't that the most awesome thing you've ever seen? Asked Jake Sisko. He was standing at one of the large windows on the upper level of the promenade, staring out into space. There was an endless fascination for him in looking at the stars. Other people and alien beings found the view just as attractive. Scattered along the upper level were a dozen or so individuals either staring or just glancing out at the view. At that moment, though, there was much more than simply stars to be seen. Deep Space Nine, the space station Jake and hundreds of other humans, Bajorans, and other species lived on, was situated on the edge of the Denorios asteroid belt in the Bajoran solar system. The station was here because of the wormhole. It was kind of hard to grasp exactly what the wormhole was. It was some kind of tunnel punched through subspace, joining this spot in the Bajoran system with one almost half a galaxy away. Passing through the wormhole in a matter of minutes, a spaceship could cross from Bajor to the Gamma Quadrant, a voyage that would normally take even a powerful starship like the USS Enterprise more than 70 years to make at top warp speed. Most of the time, the wormhole was invisible to the eye, but when a ship passed through, it became suddenly and spectacularly visible. It was as if a huge, sparkling whirlpool was spinning in space, glowing and pulsing with all the colors ever imagined, and then some. The tunnel itself would spring into being, and then the ship traveling through the wormhole would fly toward the station. In a flurry of color, the wormhole would fold in on itself and vanish. Jake had just seen this happen as the freighter came through the glowing web of colors. It was spectacular, and he felt a thrill just watching it. "Isn't that the most awesome thing you've ever seen?" he repeated when his best friend didn't answer. "Huh?" Nog dragged his eyes up and glanced out the window. His face broke into a fang-filled grin.
"It sure is," he agreed. "A Bajoran trade ship, loaded with goods, too, by the look of the way it's moving."
He rubbed his hands together.
"This means a chance to make some money."
Jake sighed. Trust Nog to think he'd been talking about money and not beauty. He liked Nog a lot, but there were times when he wondered why. Nog was a Ferengi boy the same age as Jake, but apart from that, they couldn't have been less alike. Jake was tall, slim, and dark-skinned. He generally wore a jumpsuit. Nog was short by human standards and definitely took some getting used to if you hadn't seen a Ferengi before. Huge, ridged ears jutted out from his hairless head. Bony lumps and thick brow ridges made his head look overlarge. His clothing was rich and form-fitting. "I'm at the wormhole," Jake explained. "It's really spectacular, isn't it?" Nog shrugged.
"Yeah, I guess," he agreed, bored. "But we can't make a profit off it."
"Don't you ever think of anything but money?" asked Jake.
"Of course I do," said Nog. "More money."
It wasn't really his fault, Jake knew. The Ferengi were a species of beings who lived to make money. They were merchants, traders, and business beings anywhere there was a profit to be made. Nog's uncle Quark owned the bar that dominated the promenade of the station. He was also presumed to have a hand in any business, legal or illegal, that took place on Deep Space Nine. "Well, we're not going to be making any profits right now," Jake told him. "We've got to get to school." Nog scowled.
"Let's play hockey,"
he suggested, staring at the approaching freighter. "I think you mean hooky," Jake told him, grinning. "Don't you remember that Ms. O'Brien said she'd tell your uncle if you didn't turn up? And you know what he'll do to you." Keiko O'Brien was her teacher. Jake liked her, and she seemed to enjoy tutoring the small class. Nog, however, was a bit of a problem student. For one thing, Ferengi didn't like women telling them what to do. For another, they were easily distracted from their lessons by the thought of money. Nog winced.
"Yeah," he said reluctantly. "And I'd look pretty stupid if he did rip off one of my ears and made me eat it, wouldn't I?"
As they started off for the schoolroom, he added,
"Do you think he really means it?"
"I don't know," Jake answered. "But we could always find out by not showing up. You want to risk an ear on that?" Nog clutched at his ear protectively. Ferengi were very vain about their huge ears, which were very sensitive.
"No way!"
"I didn't think so." Jake privately didn't believe Quark meant his threat, but if it kept Nog attending school, he was willing to play along with it. Actually, Jake knew from what his father had said that Quark didn't actually like Nog being educated at all, let alone by humans. But Quark, like all Ferengi, was a businessman, and he could see the advantages to having someone around who understood human ways of thinking, especially if that someone was a person in his family. It would make it so much easier to take advantage of his human customers. Jake actually enjoyed school for the most part. Ms. O'Brien hadn't always been a teacher. She'd been a botanist, specializing in alien plant life when she and her husband had served on the USS Enterprise. This meant that she could tell some really great, true stories and often explain the lessons by telling them of her own adventures. It made the lessons more interesting. He and Nog were the last to arrive. There were only a dozen students in the class, and Jake was the oldest. The youngest was 6 years old. Apart from Nog, there were only two of the other students that Jake felt were okay. A human girl named Ashley Fontana and a Vulcan girl named Tara. The rest were just too young. Ashley was a tall 10-year-old with long blonde hair that hung halfway down her back. Her mother was a technician who worked with Ms. O'Brien's husband. Ashley idolized her mother and was determined to be a tech when she grew up. As a result, she loved taking things apart and trying to repair them. There were plenty of machines on Deep Space Nine that broke down often. It had been built by the Cardassians after they had conquered the planet Bajor, but it hadn't been built very well. Ashley was actually pretty good at fixing things, even if she wasn't as brilliant as she sometimes thought she was. Tara was very different. She was only 7 years old, but because she was a Vulcan, she acted much older. Jake knew that Vulcans matured mentally much faster than humans did, so Tara was pretty much on a level with him, Nog, and Ashley. On the other hand, she took a bit of getting used to sometimes. The Vulcans believed that showing emotions was wrong and that it interfered with things too much. Instead, they used mental exercises to bury their emotions and tried to live their lives on the system of logic. Tara was still young enough to forget her training sometimes, and she would let her emotions out. Then she'd be all embarrassed and ashamed of herself. Most of the time, though, she was okay. Like many Vulcans, she had dark hair, cut straight across her forehead, shaped around her pointed ears, and then cut short at the neck. Her eyebrows were slanted upward from the top of her nose. Jake and Nog slipped quietly into their seats in front of the two girls. Ms. O'Brien looked at them, but said nothing as they both activated the keypads to their computers. The teacher stood at the front of the class with a newcomer beside her. Jake studied him with interest. He was obviously a Bajoran boy. The ridges across the bridge of his nose made that quite clear, and the large earring in his right ear was the final proof. All the Bajorans seemed to love earrings. They wore them like badges or trophies. This boy looked to be about their age, and he had a sullen, bored expression on his thin face. He looked very skinny, as if he didn't eat very well. There was a faint white scar down the right side of his neck that vanished into the top of his clothing. His dark, curly hair looked as if it had been freshly cut. He looked as if he didn't want to be here. "Now that everyone is here," Ms. O'Brien said carefully, "I'd like to introduce you all to Riv Jakar. He's just come aboard the station, and he's living with his uncle." She gave the boy one of her warm smiles. "Perhaps you'd like to tell us a bit about yourself, Riv?" she suggested. Riv looked up and then deliberately yawned. "No," he replied. "I don't want to be here, and I don't aim to stay." He glared around at the rest of the class. "And I sure don't want to get to know any of these wimps," he sniffed. "What a bunch of losers." Jake felt his face burning at this deliberate insult, but he kept quiet. One of the Bajoran girls, Marn Laren, wasn't so restrained. Jumping to her feet, she glared at Riv, her face red and angry. "You better take that back," she snapped. Riv just laughed. "Want to try and make me?" he taunted her. "That's quite enough." Ms. O'Brien stepped in front of Riv, then turned to glare at Marn. "Sit down," she ordered. For a moment, it looked as if Marn wasn't going to, but then she scowled and slumped into her chair again. The teacher then turned to Riv. "That was deliberately rude," she said icily. "I won't tolerate that sort of thing in my class." Not at all bothered by this, Riv shrugged. "So send me home," he suggested. "You don't want me here? I don't want to be here. So why don't I just go?" "Because you're here to learn," Ms. O'Brien answered. "And the first thing you need to learn, I think, are some manners. You can't go around insulting your fellow students like that." "They aren't anything like me," Riv said darkly. "Just look at them. Soft, fat, and lazy, that's what they are. I'll bet none of them ever had to hide from a Cardassian patrol or steal food just to stay alive." "That's true," agreed Nog unexpectedly.
I steal food just because it's fun.
He broke out laughing. Riv scowled at this interruption. What seemed to annoy him most was that Jake and Ashley were trying not to giggle. Jake realized that the Bajoran boy didn't like the idea that they were trying to make fun of him. Fighting back the laugh building up inside, Jake managed to ask, "Did you have to hide out then?"
"Yes, I did,"
Riv said, his intense eyes daring them to laugh again and earn a face full of fist.
"My parents were both in the Bajoran underground. I was brought up fighting the Cardassians. None of you wimps ever did anything like that. While you were learning your ABCs, I was out there with a phaser fighting for my life."
Jake was starting to see why Riv was so angry now. He'd lived the life of a fugitive and never had a stable home. "So what happened to your parents?" he asked.
"My mother was killed in a raid," Riv replied. There was a lot of pain in his voice. "And the Cardassians caught my father. He died in a Cardassian jail. It took them 3 months to kill him."
He fingered the thin chain hanging from his ear.
"This was his once. It's all I have left to remember him by. He gave it to me just before he left on his last mission, to show that I was considered a man." Jake felt sorry for him, but he could understand some of the boy's pain.
"My mom was killed by the Borg," he said. "I know how hard it is. And now you're living with your uncle?"
"Him?" yelled Riv. "Only because I was forced to. He didn't fight for our planet. He's a coward, and I hate him."
The Bajoran boy glared around at the class.
"And I hate all of you, too."
Chapter 2. After a moment of embarrassed silence, Ms. O'Brien said, "Well, I'm glad you're looking forward to class, Riv." There was a little laughter at this. "Right, I think you'd better sit over by Jake," she decided. Since there were plenty of empty desks, Jake realized she was doing this for a reason. For a minute, it looked as if Riv would refuse. Then he gave an elaborate shrug of his shoulders.
"Yeah, why not?"
he agreed. He slumped in the chair beside Jake. "Thank you," the teacher said. "Now, can you operate the computer? If not, I'm sure Jake will be able to help you."
"I can do it,"
Riv snapped, glaring at Jake.
"I don't need any help from anyone for anything."
He punched the pad and the screen lit up. "See?" "That's fine," said Ms. O'Brien. "Right, class, we're starting with biology today. I'd like you all to access the file material on the Gorn."
"I'd rather study Cardassian biology," grumbled Riv.
Jake grinned. "Is it interesting?" he asked.
"It could be," replied Riv. "I might be able to find a new way to kill one."
"That is quite enough," Ms. O'Brien said firmly. "Riv, the war is over, and you have to learn to get on with your life, to make something of it."
"The only thing I want to do," Riv told her, "is to carry on what my parents started. I don't care about anything else but making the Cardassians pay for what they've done."
"There are other things in life," answered Ms. O'Brien. "You really should make an attempt to come to terms with that. But if you won't, then at least let the rest of the class learn."
Riv shrugged. "I don't care what they do."
"How kind," the teacher said. "Right, if you've all found the right data files, you'll see that the Gorn are a reptile-like species first encountered." Jake tried to concentrate on the lesson, but his attention kept wandering back to Riv. The Bajoran boy was slouched over his desk, looking bored and annoyed. He obviously didn't want to be here. He was filled with anger and hurt. Jake could understand that. Riv must have lived for years on the run from the Cardassian soldiers, always tired, always hungry, and always in danger. He'd lost both his parents in the fighting and now was staying with an uncle he clearly despised. It was going to be hard for him to adjust to this new life, assuming he even wanted to try. It didn't look very likely at the moment. At least Riv didn't disrupt the lessons further. He stayed sullen and silent for the rest of the morning. Finally, it was time for lunch, and Ms. O'Brien called for the break. Jake and Nog headed across to the small replicator unit in the corner of the room. Ashley and Ta'ara went with them. Riv, trying to look uninterested, shambled along behind them.
"I hope this thing works right this time,"
Nog complained. Ashley blushed. The food replicator in the classroom broke down almost every day. Ashley had insisted that she could repair it and had tried 6 times so far. Chief O'Brien had allowed her to try because
"She can't break it worse than it is, can she?"
Every time the replicator was repaired, it broke down again. "It's definitely right," she promised. "I stayed late after school yesterday and took it apart. I checked everything. It's definitely going to work right this time.
That's what you said yesterday, grumbled Nog, and the day before.
Yeah, well, maybe she got it fixed, Jake told his friend. Ashley was embarrassed enough by her constant failure. She didn't need Nog's complaints as well. We'll give it a try. Standing in front of the machine, he addressed the computer. Give me a soda, burger, and potatoes, he said. There was a slight pause and then a shimmering within the small chamber. On the ledge appeared a dish. Oh, gross, growled Riv. What is that? Ashley blushed furiously, her whole face turning a bright red. Stew and cheesecake, she hissed again. The Bajoran boy stared at it. In one dish? He stuck out his tongue in disgust. I ate better than that when I scavenged on the garbage dumps for food. It is not supposed to produce that, Tara informed him. No kidding, Riv laughed nastily at Ashley. Ashley was too embarrassed by another failure to get too angry at this uncalled-for insult. I don't understand it, she complained. I was sure I'd fixed it. I understand it, Riv. You're just a useless idiot like the others here. That's enough, Jake said firmly. Ashley's doing her best, so don't pick on her. You want to make me? Challenged Riv, turning to face him. He looked eager for a fight.
Go ahead and try.
Before Jake could react, Ms. O'Brien stepped forward. There will be no fighting in my class, she said. Riv, please keep from insulting everyone. Jake, maybe you and Nog could go to the replicator in my office and get lunch for everyone? Jake glared at Riv, wanting the other boy to understand that he wasn't afraid of him. Then he nodded. Okay, he agreed. It was what they had been doing all week. I don't understand it, Ashley complained again. She shook her head. I guess I'd better take it apart again after school. Tara nodded solemnly. I will help, she offered. Riv just rolled his eyes in disgust, but he did tell Jake what he wanted for his lunch and then ate it ravenously when Jake and Nog returned with the food. He was still getting used to eating regular meals, that much was clear. The rest of the classes went fairly smoothly, mostly because Riv tried hard to look as if he were sleeping through them. Ms. O'Brien refused to be baited and continued as if he were paying complete attention. Jake wasn't sure it was having any effect on Riv, but at least it helped everyone else. After lessons were finished, Riv suddenly woke up and shot out the door. Ashley and Tara headed for the replicator, ready to get back to work. Jake and Nog wandered together back to the promenade. So, Jake asked his fringy friend, what do you think of Riv?
Nothing, Nog replied. I have no intention of thinking about him at all. I'm too busy thinking about that freighter we saw earlier.
He seems very unhappy, Jake continued. Do you think he'll get used to life here? Nog shrugged.
He better. Who cares? He grinned. Let's talk about important things, like money.
Nog, this is important, replied Jake.
Humans,
muttered Nog. He made it sound like an insult.
Look, Riv's uncle works for my uncle in the bar. I've met the man. He's a fat, lazy thing with all the personality of a dead fish. No wonder Riv doesn't like the guy. Nobody else does either. So I think Riv's problems are his own. My problem is getting some money. Why don't you concentrate on that?
Jake sighed. It was obvious that Nog wasn't interested. He wasn't sure why he should care about the Bajoran boy either, but he couldn't help feeling sorry for Riv. He'd had a rough life, and now he was stuck here. Maybe there was something he could do to help him, but what? Ashley bit at her lower lip, concentrating hard on the computer chip board she was examining. A wisp of her blonde hair fell into her eyes. She brushed it back, not even noticing the dark, oily streak her fingers left on her skin. Something was definitely very odd here. You have found the problem? Asked Tara, raising a pointy eyebrow. I think so, Ashley replied. I checked out this chip yesterday. It's part of the command code mechanism. There was a small cross circuit between these 2 points. I removed it, and that should have fixed things. Tara peered down at the board. The gleam of metal where Ashley was pointing was quite obvious. It appears that the cross circuit is still there, she commented. Not still there, answered Ashley. Back again. She tapped the board in her palm. I know what it looks like. You know what it looks like to me? I think somebody's deliberately sabotaging my repairs. Raising her eyebrow again, Tara asked, You're sure? It's the only answer that makes sense, Ashley told her. I've been trying to find a broken part or some other problem. I thought it was just the equipment breaking down as usual, but this isn't an accident. Somebody had to have deliberately put it there because I know I took it out yesterday. The Vulcan girl frowned slightly. But who would do a thing like that? She objected. And why? I don't know, Ashley admitted. But when I do find out, whoever it is will pay for trying to make me look bad. I can promise you that. He or she is going to regret this.